our methods panel. I want to quickly introduce myself. So, my name is Shoma Chaudhary. For those of you who do not know me, I am the co-director of global research at the Center for Gender in the Global Context. The GenCen, as is the shortened form of the center, it is our hub for gender and sexuality research, teaching, and engagement with a global perspective. We collect scholars, students, community stakeholders with feminist knowledge to advance social change. As of now, we have over 300 plus associated faculty and staff across MSU, 100 plus graduate students, 300 plus undergraduate students, and our work and collaborations are currently at 25 plus countries. So with that, I would like to move on to introducing our panelists for today. As you know, today's talk is about seeking ethics review and the IRB approval board. And our panelists are, each four of them bring a wealth of unique expertise to today's discussion on transnational IRBs. First, we will hear from Dr. Ike Uke. Dr. Uke holds a master's in international relations from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, as well as a master's in environmental science journalism and a PhD in bioethics from Michigan State University. His research focuses on African ethics and bioethics. Dr. Ayuke has worked extensively on projects that further responsible ethical research in Africa, including helping to develop a culturally relevant IRB at the University of Nigeria. He has published many works on the topic, including an African research ethics reader from the ground up, which was just released in 2024. Next, we will hear from two representatives of MSU's IRB, which is responsible for facilitating the IRB review process, providing support to researchers to ensure compliance, and protecting human subjects. Kimberly Hess, an experienced IRB administrator, will be presenting today on MSU's requirement for transnational research. We are also joined by Rebecca Gore, the manager at Human Research Protection Program, or HRPP, at MSU, which oversees our IRB. Finally, we will hear from Professor Amos Luguna, who will be joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. Professor Luguna is the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Transformative Teaching, Learning, and Research at United States International University of Africa. He has a PhD in Business Administration from Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. His research focuses on gender-inclusive financial products, youth entrepreneurship, financial systems, and sustainability of higher education system. Before serving in his current position, Professor Luguna served as the Dean of Graduate Studies, Research and Extensions at USIU, where he was instrumental in developing a nationally credited IRB for the university in 2016. He has over 2 decades of experience in conducting and managing research projects in East Africa. We are so honored to have these panelists join us today. So without much ado, I will hand over the presentation to Ike.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chaudhary.
Let me get your
yeah, you can bring up the slide.
There you go.
Oh, I have 2 questions to answer here. I'll start with the first one. So here, I'd just like to make a quick clarification about terms, IRB and REC. Here in the US, for example, we are used to saying IRB, but elsewhere it is REC. That's REC. REC stands for Research Ethics Committee, also called Independent Ethics Committee, or IEC. This is more common in places like Africa and other places as well. IRB, of course, we know it stands for Institutional Review Board, or REB, which is commonly used in the US, Canada, and So both REC, REC, or IRB are made up of a mix of independent committee members that review research proposals, especially those that involve human participants, to ensure they are ethical and legal. Okay, and they have duties, as you're seeing here. The committee perform such duties or are charged with the work of protecting the rights, safety, and welfare of research participants, ensuring that research is conducted in an ethical and responsible manner, ensuring that the potential benefits of a study outweigh any potential harm, and also both IRBs and RECs, whichever one we refer to, require researchers to submit detailed study protocols. And I know that my fellow panelists are going to address this. Research protocols to make sure that everything follows to standards. So I'll get on to the next question. This is just a quick summary of this. And the next question is the next slide, please. Yeah. So the question is, why should scholars be ethically committed to seeking approval from a local ethics review board? Okay, this question can be addressed in a couple of ways. I can simply say that researchers must adhere to the ethical standards set up by the Belmont report. So the Belmont report, for people who don't know, was developed in 1979 by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Studies. It contains a set of ethical principles that guide research involving human subjects. And there are a number of key principles. Basically, there are four. The first one is respect for autonomy. Please, you can go to the next slide. Respect for autonomy. And this can be explained, excuse me, as the best for the individual or a norm of respecting the decision-making capacities of an autonomous person. Okay? The next principle is non-maleficence, or if we are to explain it, this means to avoid harm towards the person or a norm of legal provisions, ethical provisions meant to avoid the causation of individual harm. Now, the next point, major principle is beneficence, which entails that we do good rather than bad, or we also see it as a group of norms for providing benefits and balancing benefits against individual risks and costs. And the final one is about justice and fairness, which refers to equal access under the law for information and treatment of research participants. Now, these duties of REC members, as we can deduce, were derived from these principles. But besides the stated duties, let me provide a broader perspective of what scholars should be thinking about, even at the initial stage of seeking study approval. So please, you can go to the next slide. And at this stage, I cite a recent development, not so recent, but at least you can see in 2022, at the 7th World Conference on Research Integrity held in Cape Town. At this meeting, which I also attended, by the way, it was noted that the benefits of scientific collaboration are too often skewed towards wealthier countries. In other words, there are many ways in which research programs and practices disadvantage those living in low and middle income countries. These are the many issues that threaten the integrity of science. So bioethicists at the event provided guidance on how stakeholders such as researchers can change this. So they released what was known as the Cape Town Statement. Okay? The Cape Town Statement is titled fostering research integrity through the promotion of fairness, equity, and diversity. Next slide, please. I can just mention some of the highlights of this Cape Town statement. They include eliminating layers of injustice, encouraging fair practice in research. And to explain this a little bit, I might just add that all stakeholders from researchers, institutions, and funders to journal editors and the rest, and even publishers, must take steps to ensure that there are not worsening power imbalances in research collaborations. Funders and researchers from high-income countries should discourage what has widely now has been known as parachute or helicopter research, in which well-resourced researchers literally drop from the sky to conduct studies in lower income settings or with historically marginalized groups, but fail to involve local researchers or communities in the different stages of the research. Okay, there's this other point that was also raised, and that is recognizing indigenous knowledge. By this, they mean that ensuring that community members or knowledge holders who might not have formal qualifications are included in research teams, with their contribution being adequately valued. This is another way in which local knowledge can be incorporated equitably. And while I was going through some of these points, it reminds me of a document that we have produced here at MSU. When I say we, I mean AAP, TTP, TPP, Global Ideas, African Studies Center, even Jensen, the Writing Center. We have put together equitable partnership document that actually reflects this. So, and as the Cape Town statement was being released, quickly it started gaining traction. There's a unit at the African Union called ACDC, and this stands for Africa Centers for Disease Control. They set up a body called African Union Working Group. And I know this, excuse me, my voice this morning. I know this because I am part of that select group of 15 African scholars that ACDC invited to structure what is now known as an Afrocentric framework for health research ethics in Africa. I'm trying to bring this up because this is new, and it is something that we all have to be aware of, especially moving forward. If you are thinking about going to do research in Africa. But before I continue, let me just drop a few statistics. The African continent of 1.4 billion inhabitants constitutes 17% of the global population, but accounts for 25% of the global disease burden. Despite these startling statistics, only 1.5 to 2% of all clinical trials occur in Africa, contributing to about 3% of the global publications. So the ACDC found it necessary to take charge of what, in fact, Africa, as we all know, because of the low resource assigned to areas of research, we always come late to the game. But ACDC is trying to pick up the gauntlet to address issues when it comes to doing research with human subjects. So Africa ACDC, the only Pan-African public health agency mandated to strengthen the capacity of African Union member states to timely and effectively prevent, detect, and respond to public health threats, has been striving to safeguard the public health of the continent. So in other words, going forward, researchers seeking to do research in Africa do not have a choice but to be ethically committed, because ACDC has set a very high standard for them to do so. And I'm now going to conclude by saying that there has been series of meetings, annual meetings, quarterly meetings of these ACDC members, and then the working group that was formed by ACDC to make sure that the framework that is upcoming will be widely spread across the continent so that they can closely monitor what is happening in terms of research. So if you are wondering why scholars should be ethically committed to seeking approval from a local ethics review board, there you have it. And I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ike. That was wonderful. Next, we're going to move on to hearing from Becky Gore and Kim Hess. Would you like to share your screens, or either one of you?
I'm going to be the one that does it.
Great.
All right, so let me go back. Oops. Hi everyone. I'm Becky Gore, and I work at the Human Research Protection Program at Michigan State, and Kim is my colleague, and she handles most things with external IRBs. So that's why we thought we would work together to do the presentation. The Human Research Protection Program, it has two components, basically, one the IRB office and the other the compliance office. In the IRB office is where both Kim and I work, that the staff facilitates review processes and makes determinations for exempt and not research with human subjects. And the committees review expedited and full board projects. And the compliance office specializes in things that aren't under the IRB regulations at 45 CFR 46. They handle the FDA regulations and FERPA and protected health information. What we were told when we were asked to do this presentation, that most of the grad students that were in here would be doing exempt research. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that. That for the most part, you guys will be doing surveys or interviews, is how I understand it. And most of that will fit into exempt category 2. If you know who the people, if they're anonymous surveys, it would be 2I. If you knew who the people were and the data you were collecting would not put them at risk, it would be at 2II. And the studies can't be greater than minimal risk. But keep in mind that you have to get MSU IRB approval or an exempt determination before any human subject research begins. Every year we have 2 or 3 people who are trying to submit their master's degree or PhD and haven't gone through the IRB. And that is really awful when that happens. So if you have any questions or whatsoever about whether or not your activity needs human subjects approval, please contact us before you do any of the activity. When you want to contact us, it's through the Click Research Compliance System, and that can be found on our website, which is hrpp.msu.edu. And there are certain templates, and it's also on our website, that you must include with the IRB submission. some quick hints. Be sure to have the appropriate template, and for human subject research, it's HRP 503. Be sure to click the submit button on the left side of the workspace to submit the application. And remember, only the PI or PI proxy can submit the application, and the PI has to be a employee of MSU that's ranked an assistant professor or higher. That graduate students cannot be PIs. Another thing that really holds up the approval process is when study team members do not have current human research protection training. And there's also the templates where the consent form templates are available. And this is, once again, I can't stress this more, is that the PI is the person who assumes the responsibility for the oversight and conduct of the project, and only faculty members can be the PI. Graduate students can be listed as secondary investigators, and when you do that, you would add yourself as a primary contact, or have the PI add you as a PI proxy, so that you could submit, if there's questions and things like that, you can submit it back to the IRB. Now, Kim's going to talk a little bit about transnational research.
Thank you, Becky. So just some things to keep in mind when submitting IRB applications for transnational research. Regardless of where the research is being conducted, you must comply with MSU's human research policies. We rely on investigators to determine relevant local laws and regulations that need to be met when conducting research in other countries, including whether or not there is a local ethics board approval that's required. We don't know all the laws and regulations for human subjects research in all the countries, so we really rely on investigators to determine what those requirements are and make sure that they're obtaining any approvals necessary prior to conducting research. If we make a determination that research is exempt, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a requirement for to obtain an additional approval from a local ethics board or other institution within the country where you're conducting your research. So again, we rely on investigators to determine what is required. Our exempt determination really only covers MSU's involvement. So again, making sure that you're obtaining any approvals necessary prior to conducting research. If you will involve external collaborators in your research, so these would be non-MSU investigators, there's a couple ways where we can ensure that those individuals are covered by an IRB or ethics committee approval. If you'll have investigators who are engaged on behalf of an institution that has an IRB or ethics committee, they would likely do their own review. For exempt research, if you have external collaborators who are engaged on behalf of an institution that does not have an IRB or ethics committee, we do have a process where that institution can accept MSU's exempt determination, and we would do that through an assurance where the appropriate individual at that institution would sign an assurance to essentially accept our determination. If you will engage independent investigators, so these would be individuals who are not going to be acting on behalf of an institution, we do have a way to include those individuals under MSU's federal-wide assurance, and we would do that through an individual investigator agreement. When you do your submission to the MSU IRB, you'll want to indicate if you're going to have external non-MSU collaborators, and so that we can work with you to determine what would be required then to include those individuals in an IRB review. Next slide, Becky. And then just a couple things I want to mention about consent forms. Consent must be presented in a way that is understandable to subjects. So you'll want to be aware of the literacy level of subjects that you'll be enrolling in your research. If there are any cultural norms that you need to be aware of, make sure that you comply with those. Consent must be obtained in a language that is understandable to the subject. So if you will be enrolling subjects who do not understand English, then it's not appropriate to present them with an English consent form. And then if your research is not exempt, then you will be asked to provide translated versions of consent forms and any study documents that will be provided to subjects within your IRB application. So keep that in mind if you will be doing expedited or full board research with subjects who don't speak English, you will be asked to provide those translated versions as part of your IRB submission. Next slide. And then this is just resources. Our website, hrpp.msu.edu, has a lot of really good resources. We have consent templates, application forms and instructions, and of course, our manual and our contact information. So that's it for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. That's really helpful. Before we get started on the Q&A later, I'll pop in a couple of links that I also found useful when I was speaking with both of you in the past. But before we get to that, we have Professor Amos Njuguna joining us, and he's at United States International University. So somebody who's not at MSU and is going to be able to provide a perspective on what it's like to apply for IRB at another university. So if folks are getting ready to, for example, do their dissertation in a different country, you're going to need to think about how you're going to apply to IRB, both at Michigan State, using the protocol that we just went through, as well as in the country where you're doing your research. So, Prof. Njuguna, welcome.
Thank you. I'll just make a quick discussion of the main points today, and possibly to first let those who don't know where USIU Africa is. It's in Nairobi, and we have accreditation in both the US and here in Kenya by the Commission for University Education. And jumping on to the topic of transnational IRB, you will be required, if you are a researcher and you want to do research in any of the countries here in Africa, you will most likely be required to have an IRB. And talking about our experiences here in Kenya, what happens is that, first of all, you've got to have an affiliation with a local institution. Mostly these local institutions will be universities like ours, or they could be research centers that are accredited. So there will be national accrediting authorities. For example, in Kenya, we have the National Commission for Science, Technology and Innovation. I'll write on chat. It's a web. So you will have that affiliation. Then once you have the affiliation, there is a requirement for you to have a local IRB. Again, they have enlisted their institutions that they have accredited, and you apply to any of these institutions. And once you apply, you've got to go through a local IRB. I've seen questions from many researchers asking, I've already had my paper reviewed by IRB in MSU. Do I still have to do it again? The requirement is yes. Why? Because accreditation and standards differ. And possibly as scholars, one of the things we are doing in Africa is to look at, can we have a common set of regulations so that once someone does an IRB from one institution, then they don't have to do it again and again. It is a common problem. If you are doing more than one countries, you will experience a bit of delays because you will need IRBs from these different countries. I'm currently doing a study that's involving 16 African countries. Your guess is as good as mine on the number of IRB reviews that I need to have before I can execute research in different countries. That said, there are some of the difficulties you are likely to get. WHO, that's the World Health Organization, looked at IRB reviews in its member countries in Africa. In total, there are 47. And guess what? About 16 of them, 16, 17 of them did not even have an IRB in place. Or their rules were not effectively developed. So in those cases, you are likely to get into problems where you find that the ethical committees are not in place. Sometimes you also find that their levels of training is not as advanced as you would expect the levels of training in MSU or many US-based universities. So you find that in the absence of standardization, different countries tend to have different standards, which you must ascribe to. At USIU Africa, we do support researchers. We do support researchers, and how do we do that? First, we support them by having a local affiliation. So for us, you provide in, there are certain forms you fill in, you indicate this is my research area. We will match you with someone who understands your area and who will provide guidance to you and who will also provide guarantees and will support you with getting different affiliations or getting different permits as might be required by different bodies for you to be able to get the required data. We also support local IRB reviews, and for us, they are much faster. We will, of course, much more like MSU, we've borrowed from the US system where you can have expedited reviews. Sometimes you can have a review that goes the full cycle depending on how much time you have. But our IRB reviews go for somewhere 6 to 8 weeks. And then once you have this, we support you to apply for the local research permit. The local research permit you apply online, and we provide the affiliation, we provide you with the right documentation, and then you are able to apply. And we also support you with following up because we are an accredited IREC. So we've got a contact person who serves as what you would call customer support, so to speak, at the National Commission for Science, Technology, and Innovation. And once you have that, you are good to go. We will then support you with the different regulations. If you are going to renewable energy, there are regulations for research in that area. If you are going to health, there are regulations that relate to research in that area. So we will guide appropriately. That's the role of the local guide once you have the affiliation. And another dynamic that comes about is that different countries have different forms of governance. For example, in Kenya, we have the national government, and then we have 47 county governments. They're like federal states in the US, but they are much smaller. These counties, again, tend to have their own specific regulations. So depending on what your research is, we help you to make the application in such a way that the license you get covers most, if not all, the appropriate county government, so that then you don't get into limitations and they don't keep asking for different documents at different times. So possibly let me pause there to allow the discussion to take place. But conclude by simply saying that why do we do this? We do this to ensure that there is ethical oversight, especially for research involving human subjects. There is regulatory compliance because we are charged as an IRB with responsibility to ensure that there is regulatory compliance, but most importantly, for the protection of local communities. We subscribe to the concept of citizen science, where participants of research are more of they are significant. You don't just consider them as subjects of research, so to speak, but you respect the people from who are giving you samples, who are giving you the data, and ensure that the do no harm principle is applied in all cases. Over to you. Happy to answer very specific questions and help anyone who might be interested in transnational research. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Everybody here has such a wealth of knowledge. I have a lot of links that we were referencing during the talk, so I'm just going to pop those in the chat right now for everybody. But before we dive into questions from the audience, I wanted to ask a couple of questions just to get our conversation started. So all of you have experience either developing a local IRB or reviewing IRB applications here at Michigan State. And many of the people who are attending this event are here to learn from you so that they can be better equipped to write a transnational IRB proposal. So before we get into those specific questions, I want to make sure that we develop a checklist in a way of items that researchers should consider so that they're prepared to write that application or proposal. So first, in your opinion, what makes for a strong transnational IRB proposal? Any one of you could start that off.
I could go. And I'll share my experience because as I mentioned, we are currently doing a study on collaborative inclusive development research, where we are looking at researchers in the global north. And Ike talked about equitable partnerships, issues of attribution and ownership and all that. And we are looking at countries in sub-Saharan Africa versus the global north, including some of the researchers in the US and all that. And despite having, because we have a US partner, despite having the IRB done in the US, we also needed to have the IRB done locally in local institutions. And we found ourselves changing the proposal from one form to another to be able to accommodate the different countries. But what we found very useful is to ensure that the proposal is written in very plain words, free of jargon, free of statements that can be interpreted differently depending on context. So we would write and say something like, you are protecting human subjects. And then in one of the countries, they ask, but this looks like social science. You are not doing life or natural sciences. What exactly are you saying here? So writing the proposal in such a way that it leaves no room for different interpretations. What you are saying is very plain. And then also ensuring that you are complying with the prescribed templates. You'll notice that in some instances, some things are required. Others is a 5-page template. Others is a 2-page template. Others want you to submit the whole proposal. Then they can figure out whatever you need, where it is. And lastly, and what I found universal in all cases was the issues around informed consent. That was universal and was required in almost, actually in all cases, informed consent, and in some cases, some form that then describes the debrief procedures. But most importantly, also provide the bios of the researchers. In transnational, I realized that they are looking at who are these researchers, what kind of research have they done in the past, and do they have past issues with regard to conduct of ethical research. Over to you. Thank you.
I would like to just add a few words to what Amos has mentioned. In fact, he's on point in terms of the need for a proposal to be in simple language. In fact, simplicity is the key, as a matter of fact. And also, particularly when it comes to consent form, it has to be stated in a very, very simple, straight, direct a language that leaves no one doubting what you mean in this circumstance or the other. Being a member of an IRB here at Michigan Department of Health and Human Services for the past 9 years going and counting, this is also what we look out for. But besides that, I also want to point at the point that Kimberly, one of the points that Kimberly raised, and that is when you're putting together your proposal, among the very different things that you need to consider, respecting the culture of the place that you're going to do the research is very, very important. And that was why I brought in the work of the African Center for Disease Control Working Group that ACDC has emphasized so much because a lot has happened. A lot of communities have been taking advantage. We can't go to cite examples because there are many in history, which probably is even still continuing. So, and the way the African Centers for Disease Control is looking at this, they are very serious about that, and they are beginning to work closely with all the countries in Africa, 55 countries. I've been to these workshops and meetings for the past since 2022. Every year we've been there, and we've continued to compile the report, and we have finally sent them the framework. And mostly it emphasizes the need for the local cultural elements of what you're putting out is respected. And by the way, I have to also emphasize that this framework does not necessarily intend to supplant already existing international guidelines, but rather to complement their relevance and applicability to the African context by adding African norms, values, and principles. And if I can just give one example, Ubuntu, people have heard about Ubuntu, why it is very common across Africa, in Southern Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, West Africa. There are different ways of referring to Ubuntu, and they reference the same philosophical understanding, which is very different from the way Euro-American research practice goes about doing their own research. They emphasize the individual, but the African Centers for Disease Control wants to drum it into our ears that even that might be important in this cultural environment. Community is far more important than the individual, and we have to put that into account. I'll stop at that.
I have a couple of questions, at least one question when it comes to research in Africa, that we have two types of research. One is the biomedical and the other is the social science. And almost always with the biomedical research, there is a review in the country. But sometimes with social science, people tend to say that there is an IRB that deals with social science research. And my first question is that true? And my second question is, where would they go to ensure that that there is buy-in from the community for them to do their research?
Amos or Ike, do either of you want to answer that?
I'll leave it up to you, Amos, to answer, and then I can follow up.
Okay. So I mean, where would you go to get buy-in? Go ahead. Sorry, Amos.
Yes, there are different, one of the things that we highly recommend is that as you seek to do this, as you seek to do research, one of the things we highly recommend is try to establish an institution the institution of affiliation is very important. Try to establish an institution that supports that kind of research in that region. Because then what you do is you will come to us, for example, we, as I mentioned, we are very strong on citizen science, where we involve participants of research in a very meaningful way, including to be able to identify how the results of the research will be useful to them for impact. So these institutions then help to provide a way of getting the buy-in, or they help to provide you with a way of getting into the specific communities for you to be able to do this research. Approvals become easy when these guys find that you have a clear strategy and a clear plan of getting things done, because also cultural contexts can significantly differ, thus influencing the way you phrase issues and the way you try to get things done. As we proceed, I'll give an example, which I know will apply, but let me pause there for now.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. Working with an organization, be it an academic institution, an NGO, or research institution, government department that is connected with the work that we're doing, is absolutely very essential, because they are on the ground. They are the ones that will tell you, depending on the research that you're doing, what are some of the things that might bring about misunderstanding? How can we make the best opportunity of studying the people without stepping on toes, for example? Again, I have to refer to the work that African Centers for Disease Control is doing to make sure that people become aware going forward. Before now, there was no coherent continent-wide framework or guidance on research ethics, which respects and promotes the African values. And I continue to talk about Africa. That is where I'm more familiar with. But now such guidance has been put in place to ensure that engaging communities to partake in research will be based on the researcher's proper understanding of the community. And you get this understanding from the partnership you've developed with the local organization that you're working with, okay? Of the needs for research, which is structured around their priorities, cultural values, and socio-political circumstances. You really have to have a fairly good amount of understanding of this being the case before you can be successful in doing your research.
And please let me emphasize on what my colleague here has said, the issue of when you are making this proposal, looking at the structural, the social constructs, and how you want to approach the whole activity. There are significant differences, and we see them all the time with our researchers who come from other countries, and especially from the north. You come in, and some of the things that apply in the US don't apply here. You may come in, for example, you want to have a discussion. There are discussions, for example, you cannot have between men and women together in the same room. I'm happy I can see some people we've worked with in this call, and they'll tell you that you put men and women together in the same focus group discussion, and the women sit back and wait for the men to talk and say, you know, we can't talk when these guys are around here. They are the spokespeople. And here you are, you have your study that is looking at reproductive health, and then you find these guys, the kind of information you are getting is really very skewed. So when we are looking at these proposals, we try to see how realistic is it, because we understand these communities. How realistic is it, and how are you going to navigate through? And that is why the role of the affiliating institution is important, because we will share with you certain characteristics of that community and say, if you really, really want to succeed here, then this is what you must do. You will have to structure your interviews this way. This is the way you will collect the samples. This community does not have trust for certain processes or certain systems in government or something like that. And once you have all this in place, then your approvals become very easy, because we ask, even our IRB asks very particular questions, because there are certain communities they want to protect. And if you seem not to understand what the dynamics are, that ends up delaying the whole proposal. Over to you.
This is a fantastic discussion, and I don't want to put any stops in it, but I do want to welcome the audience to submit some questions to us, because we have about a half hour, and I want to make sure, I know we have a really diverse group of people who are tuning in today. So if you have specific questions or general questions, you can put them in the Q&A box, or you can put them into the chat, and we'll be monitoring that, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I don't know if we'll get to all of them. We're going to skip over this question for now because I want to make sure we get to the Q&A. Thank you. I have one question that came in that is from Jonathan Choti here at Michigan State, who is also a Kenyan researcher, and he helped me while I was doing my own PhD research at Michigan State, and is asking about my experience applying for IRB. And I think that this adds on to this discussion that we're having right now. I worked with Prof. Njuguna and another professor at USIU to get IRB approval in Kenya, and had to go through that NACOSTI application, the application to get the national research permit to do research in Kenya. I did that back in 2018, and I was doing it for my pre-dissertation research. And I did not want to have to get IRB approval. I did at Michigan State, but then I realized last minute that I needed to get this IRB approval to do pre-dissertation research in the country. And I had a couple of people who very quietly said, you know, you don't necessarily have to do that for your pre-dissertation. Just make sure you do it for your dissertation. It'll be okay. And I'm a very by the books person. So I went through and worked with Prof. Njuguna and Professor Munyaye at USIU to make sure that I got that approval. And it is an extra layer of hoops to jump through when you're a student that's already complicated to go do research in a new place for the first time. You've got a lot that you're figuring out. So I recognize that this is an added level of complication, but it's really necessary. And here's my warning story to you. I got this approval, so I was okay. But I needed to go do dissertation research in 2020. And so I wasn't able to actually go back and do in-person research, meaning that I ended up relying on all of that research that I had collected in 2018. So thank goodness I went through this whole process and got approval when I did to go do that pre-dissertation research and have it all approved. So I want to add, though, that I was doing community-based research, which the idea of what a community is so socially constructed. We throw that term around so much, and you need to think about multiple layers of approval. So I have Michigan State as approval. I had approval when I was in Kenya from NACOSTI, the national board that reviews my research. I had to get approval from USIU, but I was also working in an area where it's like a historically marginalized community, and I was working with a community-based organization as well. And I had them go through my informed consent script and say, is this simple enough? Is it plain enough? Because the concept of going through an informed consent form is so different in a context where people can't read, they might have never gone to school before. Walking through like multiple paragraphs of a consent form is a very foreign concept, and I actually wanted to make sure that people really understood the purpose of that consent form. So simplifying that down to the point that it was truly understandable, that it was translated properly, it takes time, but it's really important. And the spirit of what this this process of gaining consent from the people that you're doing research with, that's what we all are here for, is remembering that the purpose of what we're doing is that we're not those helicopter researchers. I love that term and hate the concept behind it, but the concept that you introduced, Dr. Ioke, about helicopter researchers is what we're trying to avoid. It takes time and it takes applying for extra funding, building it into your research proposal when you're looking at getting funding to go do that dissertation research. Include extra money to take the extra week to go through this process of vetting everything that you've done and getting feedback on it before you go to the field. And it might take more than a week too, but just really important to remember the spirit of why we're doing this, so that when you get to that interview or survey, or when you hit the launch button on your research, that you know that this is going to create a context where the people that you're doing research with are actually able to contribute as participants, and that they understand what the consent process looks like. So I have a couple of other questions that are coming in. Sorry, I just talked so much over our panelists, but I hope that that contributes to our discussion. I'm excited to have you all here today. So Terry has said, excellent discussion about the importance of local IRBs. In addition to establishing institutional affiliations, how important is it to also establish international or institutional collaborations, i.e. to develop working relationships with local investigators? Does anybody want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can quickly jump in that it always, if you have organizational agreements or different organizations, be they research institutions or academic institutions working together, it makes it very easy. For example, in our university, we have different agreements with many universities. I think the last time I checked, it was close to 60. And what then happens is when you reach out, like if someone from MSU reaches out, it's so easy because they just reach out and, oh, that person's from MSU. I think we work together with these people. If we have any questions, we know who to quickly jump to because we do have these agreements. So therefore, at academic leadership and research leadership levels, our job is to create these partnerships so that then our students and affiliates can very easily get and tap into our networks. And this, for me, I can say has worked very well because you come in and you want to do research, for example, on HIV. We already have institutional agreements with organizations that work on HIV. So then what happens? As an affiliate of the university, then you tap into our networks and you are able to do that research very easily. I've seen people who've come to collect data and hoping to take up to 10 weeks. And in 5-6 weeks, they are done. Why? Because you have these institutional affiliations that make the introductions and entry into the country very easy. So in many words, the answer is yes, having these collaborations, and it's the job of academic leaders to be able to create the path for researchers. Thank you.
That's a great answer. And just to plug Jensen and ISP at large, if there's people here today who are thinking, I don't have these connections, I want to do research in India or insert any country here, and you're thinking, where do I go to get these connections? Email people in an area studies office at Michigan State, like the African Studies Center, the Asian Studies Center, or feel free to send us an email at Jensen. We do research on gender in a global context, so especially if it's gender related, we'll be able to help you, but we'll be able to direct you to the right person here at ISP because this is our job. We have all of these relationships with folks like Prof. Njuguna at USIU to be able to get you connected to scholars. This is not supposed to be such a scary process. So we have a question that I think is a good next step here. Veda asked, realistically, how far in advance should you build a relationship with a community and local organization to prepare for the IRB submission? And Miriam asked, how long does MSU IRB approval take? So I think that there's a lot of different answers to this. As soon as possible when you're talking about building the relationships with local partners. But Prof. Njuguna, I think that you were saying, how long does the process for applying for NACOSTI, the in-country research permit, and applying for IRB take for folks through USIU?
First, it all depends on how well the application is made. Like any other IRB, I believe even in MSU, if you follow the instructions, you don't do a haphazard job, you pick that application template and do justice to it, so to speak. You provide all the required information. I've seen a lot of time is lost at the desk review, where the document just lands on the Secretariat's desk and they are trying to decide, do we take it forward for review or do we have everything? Depending on how fast you respond, if the document is ready, and if you have any questions, I always advise, please email someone, ask them. There is this section of the form. What am I supposed to provide exactly? Otherwise, they will take the document, stay with it for 10 days, 2 weeks, and then return it to you instead of progressing it forward. But generally, assuming that everything is in place, for us, if we have, it's an area that we have in-house expertise, it will take you, in about 4 weeks, you'll be able to have got your IRB, and that is without expediting, because what we've done is that we've created different committees so that every 2 weeks there is a committee that is sitting to review the documents that are available. Instead of having one university-wide committee, we've created like 3 committees that look at different functional areas, and then the overall committee only meets to approve what has been done by the different subcommittees. So that has made it easier. 6 to 8 weeks on average, assuming there is a bit of back and forth here and there. Sometimes they will review and possibly ask for more details after the review. That's where the 6 to 8 weeks come in. The process with applying for the local research permit, nowadays it has been made easy. It's online. They have accredited certain universities and research institutions that do a good job with IREC. And I'm happy that ours is one of those that's very highly ranked. So ours move very fast. And they'll even tell you if that's coming from USIU, those guys are quite responsive and they do a thorough job. So you are able to get it even in a couple of days with the IRB at the national research permit. But then also to answer the other question very quickly about the extent of involvement with the local communities, I think for me, it's actually much more of meaningful engagement, so that once you get to these communities, just engage meaningfully. Like, don't, talked about helicopter or parachute researchers. Don't just land and in a day you expect to get all the information and just go, because people have learned to ask, so what? To what extent are you really getting to the depth of the issues that these communities are facing? Some community, depending on the level of research, some communities might even be very difficult to reach. You might have to cultivate the relationship, possibly by either having a discussion with the leaders, telling them, even letting them know what the research is all about, letting them know that either there are direct or no direct benefits of this research, guaranteeing their confidentiality, because you have to understand that in some of the contexts where we live, people even fear speaking because they would be reprimanded, say, by governments, like you are saying. There are no health provisions, and the government position is that there are health provisions, or a certain system is working or is not working. There are those dynamics. What I would urge researchers outside Africa, please understand these dynamics and try to see what are these communities saying without saying directly to you. So it requires a lot of intelligence, a lot of perseverance, working with them, seeking the right authorization. I keep insisting to my colleague, international researchers, please respect the local authorities. They can even be sometimes they can be very rough. They would even chase you away. They can be very rough. And what saves you is all the information. Ensure that you have the right permits and the right partners, and you have the contacts of the local affiliators, because they can really help you out. Up to nowadays in Kenya, up to and including whether you get visa on entry, you'll make applications, and if your papers are not perfectly in order, you get to the airport and they say, okay, so you are in trouble. We do not see your research permit. We can't see it online. So what's happening? And that is the time you realize that, oh, the local contact person is extremely important. Because if, for example, we are from USIU, and get in touch with the government authorities and say, we know this person, put together the right documentation, you'll get a smooth entry. Yeah, over to you.
It seems like one of the things you're really stressing, and that's something that would improve people's research, is having the local community involved, at least at some level, because I think people should spend a lot of time thinking about, what the research is going to do really good for the student who's going to get a master's or PhD degree out of it, but what is it going to do for the community? And if you can think about that, what it seems to me you're saying is that you're going to get a more fruitful research experience. And it would be, that rather than just going in, collecting the data that you need and then getting out of there, and that's the end of what the community sees of the researcher. But if you have local people, then they can see the benefits as well. And I really liked what you said about how long an application takes. You could do some talks for me. That's exactly the same way it is at MSU. The more complete your application, the better, the faster you get back to the IRB, the shorter it's going to take. But it can take, an exempt application can go from anywhere from a week to like 6 or 7 weeks, depending on how complete it is and how fast the responses are and how many different offices we need involved in the study. That is really hard to pin down anymore. It is getting harder and harder because research is getting more and more regulated, that to figure out what exactly the person needs to have a successful research experience.
And on the aspect of when is the best time to start contacting your local partner, my advice will be as soon as possible. If you're like a doctoral student, a master's student, you apply. We've made it clear here that the best way is to get the approval here and then get the approval over there. But I would advise that as soon as you apply to get the approval here, start making contact with your collaborator on the other side, because it has been made very clear that this process is not fixed in concrete. Okay, it can be short, it can be long. So you don't have to wait until your application is approved on this side before you make contact on the other side. I know that where I work, or rather where I contribute some time to the IRB with the state government, Michigan State of Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, sometimes can be a matter of weeks, sometimes it's a matter of a month. So this way you already started, if for example, you're lucky, it moves very quickly here, you can then, proceed to the other side and then get it done over there. Yeah, so in a nutshell, you start as quickly as you can start the two sides at the same time, because that will help you manage your time well.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that, because you're submitting to potentially multiple institutions, some institutions like the local ethics board might require some additional changes to something that maybe the MSU IRB has reviewed. And so there might be some back and forth, to make sure that, whatever is being presented is acceptable to both IRBs and ethics committees. So that can take some time, that back and forth for sure. So I will just reiterate what my colleagues have said here, that, the sooner the better to submit to the IRB, because that process may take some time.
To say it in the simplest terms, if you're a grad student who's doing research in the summer, you should not be waiting until the spring to start thinking about getting your instruments ready, putting in these applications. If you're doing research this summer, submit now, today, like don't delay. But also, if you can do it sooner, then that's great, because it's going to cause you a lot less stress while you're booking rooms and getting all of the things in order to actually travel. You want to have your research permit and your IRB approval already ready to go. So you don't want to be waiting for that last minute. But if you can get it done sooner, get it done sooner. And I hope that answers the question to Miriam, who asked about how long MSU IRB approval takes. I think that Becky had mentioned that it depends on the type of application that you have and also how complete your application is. So if we have some fellows here who are going to be African Future Fellows next year, you should definitely be leaning on your mentor at Michigan State, the person that you'll be working with. Ask them about applying to IRB and how soon you should be getting those things ready, because that mentor, the faculty at MSU, will know about that process and about how long you should be expecting and how to get ready for that application.
Can I interrupt just once? The
Yes,
other thing
please.
is, we'll have a meeting with you if you want one. If you start getting ready to put in your application and you got some questions about what you need to put in or how to go about doing it, that you could you could email the IRB and give your availability, and somebody from the office will set up a Zoom session with you to help walk you through whatever questions you have. It's so much easier to do it in quote unquote in person than it is to go through email. And so that's what we strongly encourage you to do, that we're here to help you. And people think lots of times that the IRBs kind of hinder research, but they don't. They really want to help you be able to do whatever it is that you want to do, but it needs to be regulatorily correct. And that's our job, is to help you figure that part out. So don't hesitate to call and make an appointment if you have questions that you need help with. Thank you.
And to add on to that, I saw Terry just posted just a shout out of appreciation to Kim and Becky. They're amazing sources of support and excellent advice. So we have the right people here today. Thank you. Shoma, I see that your hand is raised. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, quickly for the African Futures Fellows, who a number of them are attending today, and some of their mentors are too. I would strongly recommend that maybe we should coordinate something with the AP office to set up a meeting with Becky and Kim separately to sort of further the conversations, because depending upon where the project is located, it could be either the fellow who is the PI, so which means that that would need to have its own set of IRB, and then MSU would also need to file, but it could also be situated in MSU. So different PIs, different locations, and so it's a very exciting project, but it would need multiple coordination. So thank you. I'll just stop here.
Justin says, great idea, Shoma. I'll reach out to the IRB office to set up an info session. So hopefully we'll have something like that coming up soon. I also want to make sure that we have time to answer Courtney's question. If we'll speak to the practice of IRBs or RECs charging for review and how we recommend investigators and local collaborators anticipate and budget for the fees. We haven't really talked about this. At MSU, we pay tuition, which pays for people to review our IRBs here. But when you're applying to an IRB or REC overseas, or in another place that's not Michigan State, you should expect to have to pay a fee for the IRB review. I think Prof. Njuguna and Prof. Ioke, you might have experience with this. Can you speak to what that's like?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head that yes, every time you apply out there, you expect that you will make a fee because this IRBs are actually run by institutions, and the budget of operating those specific units, as a university, for example, will cater that through our research budget. But again, that is not catering for proposals that we review that come from outside the university. So you've got to be prepared, and they charge different fees. But again, many times I advise that look at the fees, the cost benefit, the fees versus how long will it take. A quick review of the difference fees charged. We did a quick review of the difference fees charged by IRBs here in Kenya, and we also saw that the lower it is, the longer it takes. So sometimes you have to see, do I want to wait for 98 days? Or would I have to top up another $200? It's $200 a bit more expensive than the other one. Do I really want to wait for 3 months or to be able to pay this? And expedited IRBs, expedited reviews are also charged for that and I believe it's the same in MSU. If you want it expedited, then there is a small fee for it. Thank you.
Yes, I'm familiar with IRB applications being processed for some fees, and of course it varies from institution to institution, it varies from country to country. Of course, they don't all have the same currency. So it's all part of what we've been emphasizing about trying to understand the culture of the place. This is part of the culture of the place, either the culture of the institution or the culture of the cultural milieu as a whole. And if you have to give another example, you can talk about, when we come to thinking about compensation for research subjects, what is compensation? What is an adequate compensation for the study you want to do? And when does compensation become inducement, something like that? These are all some of the things that you have to understand if you have built a good relationship with your local partner, the collaborator that you're working with. Because there are several things that we on this side might think of as inducement, which is not looked at as inducement over there. So good understanding of what obtains in that cultural milieu is very, very important. It can never be overemphasized.
Certainly. I also want to add that if you are concerned about paying for that fee, you can go to your grad director potentially and ask them about whether there's any funds to pay for that. That's something that you could apply to multiple different funding sources. So if you're doing that research overseas, there's ways to to get that money. You don't have to pay for that necessarily yourself, but that's all the more reason to go and figure out what are the requirements, the applications that I'm going to have to go through to do research in this area so that you can include it in your budget. If you're applying for GOF funding, for example, for grad students at Michigan State, if you're applying for funding, you should be including that in your application so that if it's not covered, your grad director sees, oh, they're going to pay an extra however much money to make sure that they get IRB approval in the country. And that's something that's worth paying for. So you can advocate for that to be paid for by folks in your grad program. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be, but you can ask for it. So great. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, Dr. Njuguna is raising her hand.
Yes, maybe as you check if there is another question, there's something that I would want to share with all of us that because we are talking about the research ethics, and we know that research ethics start from by the time we conceptualize the research to the time we disseminate and even get to the implementation side. And my advice is once you've taken this research, it's very, very important that you share the findings with the local communities and your affiliating organization. They will help you understand different dynamics. I just want to share with you some researchers who we supported here through the affiliation, and they were running an impact evaluation on how to reduce infant mortality. That's the kids who are being born, and how do you ensure that you reduce the number of children who die at the point of birth. And these guys went to this hospital, and of course your impact, the intervention was if you have a health center that's located near certain villages, then you would expect that that health center is there and is equipped. Then you would expect that more women would visit the clinic for prenatal care and would eventually have safe deliveries. But over the year observation, that did not happen. And they were trying to understand what exactly happened. But guess what? There were only two reasons. One, this is a community that doesn't believe in the person, the medic, or I don't know whether to use the term midwife, being a man. And they brought some young people there. And so the women shied off and they're saying, no, you see, what's happening here? So by having this communicative validity of the results, they came to understand the intervention was good, but it did not fail because it failed because of a cultural thing. If someone just cared to understand that, how do these people behave? And in another word, beds were facing a certain direction, and you are in a community that believes if a woman is giving birth facing this side, then that's bad omen, and their children are likely to die. So say, why did people avoid going to hospital? Yes, yet it's the most important thing. So if you live with these findings and you don't get back to the people to understand why exactly are these findings like this, and doing those qualitative aspects that go to the depth of the understanding of the cultural aspects, you totally misrepresent your study results. You conclude having dispensaries in there and clinics will never help people because they will never go to hospital anyway. But that's not why they are not going to hospital. Understand the local context, because this ethics thing permeates up to the point at which you have your results, your recommendations, and remember, someone else will rely on those recommendations to implement their interventions. Thank you.
Certainly. And I think that that's part of why we're saying that it's so important to have these relationships, not just with, building a strong relationship with the research participants, but also with the folks that are supervising your research so that you can continue after the research is conducted, especially for qualitative data analysis. If you're not from that context, you still have to rely on the folks who are your research partners to tell you whether you're interpreting the data correctly, because you cannot just go off into the US and analyze the data and expect that you're going to understand the meaning of what people are telling you accurately. You need to have that be a constant dialectic back and forth between you and the folks who are supervising your research in country, or your research assistant who's there, or a local community board, so that you can make sure that you're interpreting that correctly. I'm really glad that you brought that up, Prof. Thank you. So I'm so grateful that we have had everybody here today to speak about transnational IRB. I think that this is a really complex topic, and we weren't sure if we were going to be able to pull it all together, because we've got different examples from different places between Michigan State, and making sure that we get to the heart of what does ethics mean in a transnational context. And so this has been fabulous having everybody here today. I'm really grateful that you're willing to spend your mornings with us on Valentine's Day. And I hope that everybody, yes, and evenings. Thank you, Prof. I hope that all of you have a wonderful rest of your day. So thank you to all of the presenters, to the panelists today. We're grateful for your expertise and willingness to join. So everybody have a great day.